A bruised woman and her child knock at a stranger's door, and a giant cowboy answers with silence, a blanket, and bread. But by dawn, a drunk husband cries theft, and a slick banker smells blood in the snow. Gideon Boone doesn't shout. He writes, he files, he waits, because mercy, when done right, needs proof. Now a mob is coming, the law is hesitating, and the wind howls like judgment through the pines. What kind of man shelters the broken, then stands alone on his porch when the whole town rides against him? The snow had a way of muffling sound in the canyon, like God had pressed a finger to the land and told it hush. Gideon Boone heard the crunch before he saw them. 2 sets of lighter steps, one dragging. When he opened the door to his cabin, the wind shoved in hard, flinging flakes across the floor. A woman stood on the porch, wrapped in a torn shawl, her cheeks raw with cold. In her arms, a girl no older than 5 clung tight, face buried in her neck. Gideon said nothing, just stepped back. The woman crossed the threshold like someone who hadn't been invited anywhere in a long time. She sank to the floor by the stove without asking, as if her legs had given out. The girl peeked up with wide gray eyes and flinched at the heat, then leaned closer. Gideon set the kettle on, pulled out a quilt, didn't speak until steam rose. "You runnin'?" he asked. The woman nodded, jaw tight. "From my husband." He didn't press. Instead, he poured 2 cups and laid a biscuit on a tin plate. "Name?" "Mara Quinn," she said. "This is Lark." The child didn't look up. "Gideon Boone," he said simply. They ate in silence. Fire popped. Outside, the wind moaned against the logs. By nightfall, Gideon had moved the cot near the hearth. Mara had bandages on her shoulder, a cracked lip cleaned. Lark was asleep under a bear hide, small hand curled in her mother's skirt. Gideon leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. He'd seen women run before. He'd helped 1 or 2. Most didn't make it. This far. The trail between Deer Hollow and Bone Ridge was a rough one, worse in winter. "You ain't safe yet," he said. "Not unless he's dead or in jail." Mara looked at him then, really looked. Her face held no tears, no pleading, just quiet. "He's neither," she whispered, "but he's drunk." And slow Gideon gave a slow nod. "Slow don't mean stupid." She didn't answer. That night, he kept the lamp low and his Winchester nearby, not drawn, just close. He didn't ask what Vince Doolin looked like. He already knew the kind. Greasy collar, loud in daylight, mean in private. Next morning, Gideon walked down to the mailbox stake. More habit than hope. Nothing there. But when he came back up the trail, he saw it. A square of paper nailed to the door, fluttering in the wind. He pulled it loose, read the scrawl. "Bring her out or we come, before first light." No signature, just bad penmanship and worse intent. Gideon folded it once, slipped it into his coat pocket. He stepped inside, set water on. Again. Mara sat on the edge of the cot, eyes hollow. "They know," he said. "I figured they would. They planned to come." She didn't flinch. "They always do." Gideon didn't raise his voice. He poured more water, sliced bread. His calm was a stone in the storm. "You stay here," he said. "Eat, warm. If trouble comes, it'll knock first." Outside, snow kept falling. Tracks from last night were already swallowed up. But Gideon knew which way this went. A man like Vince Doolin didn't work alone when there was whiskey and wounded pride involved. And a man like Phineas Lomax, bone-dry banker, collector of names and failures, was never far when someone stumbled. Gideon had seen his kind leverage shame into mortgages, fists into signatures. Mara's husband might be the barker, but Lomax held the leash. As the sun vanished behind a curtain of gray, Gideon sharpened his pencil and turned a page in his ledger. Dates, names, weather notes. "Cold's deepening," he murmured. In the far room, Lark stirred, under the quilt, and whispered, "Mama?" Mara answered soft, "I'm here, baby." Gideon glanced once at the note again. Trouble would ride with the dark. A second note promised they'd come before first light. Snow kept falling, soft but relentless, turning every sound into a hush. Gideon Boone stood at his kitchen table at first light, a folded note in front of him. The words, "before first light," were still sharp even after a sleepless night. Mara dozed near the stove with Lark curled under her arm, both breathing steady but shallow, like people who'd run too long and weren't sure they'd stopped. He slipped the note into his ledger and closed it with care. Dates and names had their own weight, and he intended to carry them clean. Outside, hoofbeats moved down Main Street. Gideon watched from a frosted window as banker Phineas Lomax rode past with two strangers at his side. Lomax sat tall in his saddle, scarf tucked just so, like a man who expected deference. The riders looked like helpers on paper, but had the stance of hired muscle, hands always near their belts, eyes scanning. By noon, word had spread. Lomax had filed a moral nuisance complaint at the sheriff's office, accusing Gideon of harboring another man's wife and corrupting community values. Vince Doolin, still drunk, trailed behind them at the edge of the street, shouting things no one wanted to repeat. Sheriff Cutter stood in his doorway, hands shoved into his coat pockets. When Gideon approached, the sheriff gave a short shake of the head. Lomax got a signed petition already. He's smart, doesn't need bullets when paper'll do. I'm not hiding her, Gideon said evenly. I'm keeping her alive. I know, Cutter said, voice low, but I can't stop 'em all if they show up at your place. Not without cause. That's why I'm here, Gideon said. Cause is what I'm gathering. He left the office and went first to Josiah Yates, the blacksmith. Josiah was a broad man with coal-smudged cheeks and a voice like gravel. He listened while Gideon explained, leaning on his hammer like it was a staff. Sworn statement? Josiah asked. Working on it. You need me there. I'll come, Josiah said simply. But I ain't firing first. Neither am I, Gideon replied. Just stand witness. From there, he walked to the schoolhouse where Ruth Ellery was finishing her lessons. She was younger than Mara, but carried herself like someone who'd been asked to be older than her years. When Gideon told her what Mara had endured, the beating weeks ago, Vince's debts to Lomax, her hands tightened on the slate she held. She left him because she feared for her life, Ruth said. That matters. It matters on paper, too, Gideon said. A sworn statement of fear places her under protective custody until a judge rules. I need you. As witness, Ruth nodded. I'll write it tonight. Back at the cabin, Gideon spread his ledger open on the table. He sketched a timeline, dates of Vince's drinking binges, Lomax's demands, Mara's arrival, the nailed notes. Lark sat at the edge of the table drawing a crooked house with a pencil stub. Mara, still weak, watched him work. You think paper will stop them? She asked. It's the only thing that might, he said softly, and paper keeps men honest, even if they hate it. She reached over and touched Lark's hair. You could send us away. He shook his head. No place safer. You stay. I'll handle the rest. He slid the nailed notes into an envelope, labeled each with date and time. The ledger stayed open beside it, a quiet witness. As dusk fell, Sheriff Cutter rode out to the cabin. His horse's breath smoked in the cold. He dismounted, hat pulled low. They're saddling, he said quietly. Lomax's men, Vince with 'em. They aim to ride tonight. Gideon's jaw worked once. Thank you for telling me. I'm not sure how long I can hold them, Cutter said. If they come here, it'll be more than I can stop. Gideon looked at the snow outside his door, the same snow that had brought Mara to him. Then we'll do this by the book. And hope the book still counts. Cutter swung back into his saddle. Good luck, Boone. As the sheriff's horse disappeared into the storm, Gideon closed the door gently. Mara and Lark were asleep again, trust fragile but real. He opened his ledger one more time and wrote in neat script, witnesses gathered, complaint filed, threat noted. He laid the pencil down. The storm rattled the windows. Sheriff Cutter's words echoed in the dark. If they show here, I can't stop 'em all. The storm hadn't broken, but the wind shifted. Colder now, carried a different kind of warning. Gideon Boone sat at his cabin table with three things in front of him. Ruth Ellery's sworn statement, his own ledger full of dates and names, and a battered, dog-eared copy of Territorial Statutes, Volume 1. He ran a calloused thumb along the pages, stopping at domestic protections. He read aloud under his breath, no man may reclaim a spouse by force if fear of. Violence is sworn under community witness, pending judge's ruling. He looked up at Mara, who sat quiet, hands folded, shoulders drawn inward. You swore truth, he said gently, and Ruth signed it. That means you're not hiding here. You're under protective care. Legally, Mara gave a dry, broken smile. That ever stopped a drunk and his friends? No, Gideon admitted, but it might stop a sheriff. He pressed forward. Ruth had mentioned something else. Vince and Mara's so-called marriage, done in haste at a mining camp years back, under a busted preacher. Gideon dug through the bottom drawer and found an envelope tied with twine. Inside was an old page of church guest records, copied by Ruth long ago. Gideon scanned until he found it. V. Doolin and M. Trask. Ceremony by Preacher E. Wilk. No license on file. He frowned. No official license. Just a scribbled name in a traveling Bible. Mara shifted. That preacher didn't even finish the vows. Vince handed him a bottle and said that was enough. Gideon leaned back. If that's true, and I believe it is, he never had a claim on you. No lawful marriage. And if we can get the real registry from that mining camp, it might show Vince was already married. Mara blinked. He did talk about a woman in Salt Flats. Called her his mess he left behind. I thought it was just drunken talk. Gideon stood slowly. Might not be. If he married her first, that'd make you nothing to him in the law's eyes. No claim, no threat, no right. Outside, snow flurried against the windows. Lark snored soft in the cot, wrapped in quilts like a bundled promise. Gideon packed Ruth's affidavit, the ledger, and the church page into his satchel. Then he took up a pencil and wrote a letter to the circuit judge in Dry Hollow. He laid it out simple. Woman fled domestic harm, threat of mob action, legal loophole suspected, request for early ruling. He dated it clean and bold. He looked at Mara. You sure about your truth? She nodded once. Then I'll carry it the rest of the way. He sealed the envelope, wrapped it in waxed paper, and stepped outside. The wind nearly stole his breath. Down at the blacksmith's, Josiah was shoeing a mule by lantern light. I need a favor, Gideon said. Fast one or quiet one? Josiah asked. Both. Need a fast boy to take a sealed letter to Judge Raleigh in Dry Hollow. By noon tomorrow, Josiah tapped his hammer twice, thoughtful. Eli Jenkins, his father owes me one. That boy could outrun guilt in a rainstorm. Tell him not to read it, not to stop, and not to speak it. Josiah grunted. I'll see to it. Back at the cabin, Gideon lit the stove again. The shadows were longer now, but something in the air had changed. Not hope exactly, but direction. He reached for his ledger and drew 2 fresh lines beneath the last entry. Then he wrote, filed, affidavit of fear, pending, judge's ruling, suspect, false marriage. Mara watched him from the corner. You think paper'll hold him off? No, he said, but it'll catch 'em when they fall outside. The blizzard thickened, but so did the proof. The judge's reply rode back through a rising storm. Sunday morning broke through gray skies and drifting snow. The church bell rang flat against the wind, its rope frayed but faithful. The pews of Elk Hollow's chapel filled slower than usual, the cold keeping folks stiff and suspicious. Gideon Boone walked beside Mara and little Lark, both bundled tight in wool cloaks. They sat on the last bench near the door. Ruth Ellery gave them a short nod from the choir rail. Sheriff Cutter leaned against the wall, with arms crossed and eyes like cloudy glass, watching but not yet choosing sides. The sermon was about forgiveness, though the pastor's voice shook on certain words. When he asked the congregation to bow their heads, no one missed the fact that half the crowd kept one eye open, stealing glances toward the back pew. Mara didn't flinch. Lark clung to her hand. After the final hymn, folks started shifting out, but Gideon rose and stepped forward. Pastor, he said calmly, voice cutting clear through the room, I'd ask your help as witness to a sworn statement. The pastor blinked, unsure. That a legal matter, Gideon? It is, he replied, but it starts with truth and ends with light. The pastor looked to Sheriff Cutter, who gave the smallest nod. Mara rose slowly. She faced the front, lips pale, fingers shaking just a little. Gideon stepped aside. I, Mara Quinn, she said, declare under God and law that I left Vince Doolin for fear of harm to me and my child. I seek no man's shelter but the courts. The room held its breath. Then, from the third row, a widow's voice hissed. Shameless. She sits with her new man before the old one's cold. Ruth stood. Mrs. Carmichael, she said sternly, you gossiped through 3 hymn books and still ain't found grace. A few chuckles broke the tension, but eyes still darted. The air buzzed with tension and judgment, neither spoken, both thick as frost. Lark's small voice, steady and pure, carried across the room. Mama didn't do wrong. The pastor stepped down and gently took Mara's hand. You have my witness, he said. Just then the door creaked. Phineas Lomax entered like a shadow cast long and thin. He doffed his hat, all courtly smirk. Paper tricks and public drama, he said, surveying the scene. Boone, Your bread must be cold these days, warming the unwanted. Gideon didn't take the bait. Paper keeps folks honest, or at least makes them think twice. Lomax leaned close, voice low. Law bends to the loud, Gideon. Always has. Then I'll speak steady. Outside, the sharp crack of hoofbeats cut through the hush. Everyone turned. Vince Doolin rode up with 2 hired men behind him, hats low, eyes dark. They didn't dismount, just circled the church green like wolves sniffing the edge of firelight. Inside, the bell rope gave way with a dry snap. The old bell groaned, swung once, and stopped. Gideon took it as a sign. He turned to Sheriff Cutter. You saw it. You heard it. That's sworn testimony now. Cutter rubbed his jaw. You're making it official then? I am. I'll file affidavit and bond within the hour. Lomax tried one last jab. What you got is a scared girl and a borrowed child. Law don't build fences around every widow with regret. Gideon stepped closer. It builds them for those in danger. That's the difference. As he helped Mara gather her things, Ruth leaned over. You just stirred a hornet's nest, Boone. I didn't stir it, he said quietly. I just refused to run from it. Outside, the wind picked up again. The bell rope snaps as the doors blow wide. Snow spits sideways across Elk Hollow by the time Gideon Boone stepped into the sheriff's office, a folded document in his hand and calm in his stride. I'm filing protective affidavit, he said, laying it on the counter. This places Mara Quinn under judicial shelter until the circuit judge arrives. Sheriff Cutter took the paper, read it once, then nodded slow. And this? Gideon unfolded a second note, the one nailed to his door. Threat, plain and dated. I want it logged. Behind them, the potbelly stove hissed and snapped. Cutter grunted. You sure this is the trail you want to walk? Only one worth walking, Gideon replied. An hour later, bond posted and form stamped, Gideon stepped into the storm again. The wind clawed at his coat like fingers. He made his way home in darkness, boots crunching through powder that swallowed the road. That night, he led Mara and Little Lark through the barn, past hay bales and a sleepy goat, to the root cellar beneath. Blankets, dry wood, and tea waited there. He lit the lamp low. Stay here tonight, he said. Not out of fear. Just caution. I'll keep watch above. Mara touched his arm briefly. You've done too much. He shook his head. Not enough. Not yet. Upstairs, he stoked the fire and sat near the window, rifle within reach but untouched. He didn't believe in drawing steel when paper could speak louder, but sometimes paper needed time, and time was thin. Near midnight, he heard it. Hooves. No attempt to be quiet. Just the stomp of purpose and entitlement. 2 men on horseback. One kicked over the porch rail with a boot heel. The other hammered the door with the butt of his rifle. Boone! A voice barked. Gruff, not Vince's. You're under arrest for disturbing the peace. The door flew open before Gideon could rise. They stormed in, grabbed his arms, twisted them back. One smiled wide, 2 wide. You're coming with us, nice and gentle now. Sheriff sign off on this? Gideon asked as they shoved him outside. Orders signed by Deputy Weller. Sheriff's gone to bed. Gideon didn't resist. He looked past the men, no sign of Vince. That unsettled him more. In town, the jail reeked of coal smoke and old sweat. They locked him in with no questions, no record. Vince showed up 10 minutes later, reeking of sour whiskey and pride. He staggered to the bars, sneered, and spat on the floor. You think you can take my wife, my name, my kid? He slurred. Gideon didn't answer. He just looked at him, steady, quiet. You'll see, Vince snarled. Come dawn, she's mine again. He stumbled out into the storm, and silence returned to the cell. Later, footsteps approached again. Josiah Yates appeared at the bars, scarf wrapped high, hat dripping. I saw them drag you in. Ruth's got the women safe. Parsonage is locked. Gideon gave a small nod. That's good. Josiah leaned closer. You know what they're stirring, right? Lomax is behind it. He's been pushing this town like cattle through mud, circulating a petition to seize your land. Public decency clause. I've figured as much, Gideon said. What's your read? Josiah held up the note from the cabin. This, along with their bragging in the saloon. I say we let 'em keep talking. Let 'em hang themselves on their own rope. Gideon let out a breath. You'll gather the statements? Already started. Outside, the wind screamed. Through the cracks, snow danced like ash in the street lamps. You got a plan? Josiah asked. I do, Gideon said, but it'll need witnesses and patience. The old bell on the church tower let out one tired clang. Josiah turned to go. "Midnight," he muttered. "Let's see what daybreak brings." The judge is snowbound 2 towns away. Gideon must wait. The cell was colder than the wind outside. Iron bars didn't hold warmth, and neither did the stone walls. Gideon sat on the wooden bench, back straight, coat folded over his lap. He hadn't said a word since they threw him in, not even when the deputy tried to bait him with smirks and muttered slurs under breath. Around midnight, the saloon across the street still roared. Every laugh, every clink of a glass, carried through the walls like thunder. The town was wide awake, hungry for scandal, and Phineas Lomax was feeding them spoonfuls. Sheriff Cutter stood outside the bars now, hat low, lips pressed in a line. "They're circulatin'." "Petition," he finally said, "to have your place seized on grounds of immoral harboring." Lomax already has half the town's names. Gideon didn't move. "You got folks thinking you're protecting a runaway wife just 'cause you fancy her. They're saying you're making a mockery of decency." Still, Gideon said nothing. "You gonna answer me, Boone?" Gideon lifted his head. "What would be the point? Truth ain't what they want, not yet." The sheriff sighed and leaned against the wall. "You're making it hard on yourself." "No," Gideon said softly. "I'm just not making it easy on men like Lomax." The sheriff looked at him for a long beat, then walked away. An hour passed. From the far corner cell, Josiah's whisper came low. "You still think paper's enough?" "It's what we've got," Gideon murmured back. "We've got the notes, your affidavit, Ruth's word, and the fact Mara's hiding for fear of her life. That's enough in a court." "But court ain't here," Gideon said. "It snowed in 2 towns south." Josiah leaned forward, face barely visible through the bars. "You let me read those notes out loud on the church steps come Sunday, with the whole town watching. You'll see whose truth sticks." "I'll hold you to that," Gideon said. Footsteps echoed again, light, careful. Ruth Ellery stood just beyond the iron gate, scarf wrapped tight. "I got them moved," she whispered. "Mara and Lark." "They're at the parsonage." Pastor locked it from the inside. Gideon breathed through his nose. Relief crept in but didn't linger long. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him with steady eyes. "Vince is drunk and madder than ever. He told the men at Doolin's he's taken her back by dawn." "That's 6 hours away," Josiah muttered. "Less," Ruth said. "Storm's lifting." She stepped closer. "You've done all the right things, Gideon. You've given everyone else a chance to do right, too." He nodded. "Doesn't mean they will." "No," she said, "but it means you held the line." The church bell gave one mournful clang, distant through snow and wind. Sheriff Cutter returned, keys jangling in his fist. "They're coming. Just saw 4 lanterns heading your way. I'm letting you out, but you keep the peace, you hear?" Gideon rose slowly. "Always have." The sheriff swung the cell open, expression unreadable. "Don't let it turn into blood." "I won't," Gideon said, stepping into the cold again. He buckled his coat, pulled on his hat, and headed toward the door. Outside, the town was wrapped in white and still. But out beyond the bluff, 4 pinpricks of lantern light bobbed steady through the darkness, drawing closer. Gideon turned toward them, one step at a time, like a man walking into weather he could not stop, but would stand through anyway. Lanterns bobbed toward his cabin through white dark. The snow hadn't stopped, not really. It drifted now, slow and thick as breath, swirling in the lantern light that Gideon Boone planted on his porch rail. His shadow, long and still, spilled across the drifted yard like a quiet dare. He didn't wear a gun belt, didn't raise his voice, just stood there, broad as a barn and twice as solid, boots set like fence posts in the earth. The first to reach him was Vince Doolin, teeth bared, eyes bloodshot. 2 riders flanked him, jaws tight, rifles across their backs. They slowed at the fence, eyeing Gideon's lantern. A 4th figure, Sheriff Cutter, emerged from the trees behind them, one hand resting easy on his holster. Vince didn't notice. "You think this ends with paper and candles?" Vince snarled. "She's mine, and that brat too. I'll drag 'em out with or without you." Gideon didn't blink. "She's not yours, Vince." "She never was," Vince charged. Gideon stepped aside, not fast, just right, and caught the man's arm mid-swing. One twist, clean and practiced, sent Vince to his knees in the snow. The riders shifted, boots crunching, but before hands could find holsters, the underbrush parted. Out walked Josiah Yates with a shotgun tucked across his arm. Then, Ruth Ellery, coat dusted with flurries, held tight to a leather-bound book. Behind them came Pastor Howell and two townsmen, Sam Carter and young Wade Tomlinson, eyes wide but set. Sheriff Cutter raised his voice. "This is over, gentlemen," Vince spat in the snow. "He's harboring my wife." Ruth stepped forward, her voice clear. "Mara Quinn has sworn fear of you, and I've recorded it. Her daughter confirmed it. That's protective custody under territorial statute." "Doesn't matter," Vince growled. "She married me." "Prove it," Gideon said softly. Vince blinked. "It's in the preacher's book. Ask anybody." Ruth held up a second ledger. "We did." She opened it, pages flapping like wings in the wind. "Circuit Judge Harmon sent the original camp registry. It shows your name already beside another woman. Sarah Beckett, wed 6 months prior. That makes your marriage to Mara invalid." The silence was sharp. Sheriff Cutter stepped to Vince. "That true?" Vince opened his mouth, closed it, looked. "Down." Cutter nodded to the riders. "He's under arrest. Bigamy and threats of violence." The two riders backed away from Vince like he was something rotten. One muttered, "You never said you were already hitched." Gideon turned toward the porch, where Mara now stood, wrapped in Lark's arms. Her eyes shimmered but didn't spill. Lomax wasn't there. Josiah stepped forward. "One more thing." He reached into his coat and pulled the crumpled petition, signed by folks who owed the bank, threatened with foreclosure if they didn't join. Sheriff Cutter looked at the names, then back at the group. "You all back this?" Wade nodded. Sam too. Pastor Howell said, "It's time this town stopped being run by whispers." Gideon stepped down from the porch. "You came to take what the law forbids. That ends tonight." The wind shifted. The lantern's flame danced. And Vince, cuffed and red-faced, finally dropped his eyes to the snow. Vince laughs wild. "You can't prove the marriage!" Vince Doolin thrashed. Against the sheriff's grip, wild-eyed, his breath white in the cold. "You got nothing but hearsay." Ruth Ellery held the ledger tight against her chest, her voice calm and sure. "We have more than hearsay. We have the judge's certified letter and the original registry." She unfolded a sealed envelope, crisp and official, and handed it to Sheriff Cutter. His brows drew close as he scanned it. "Name of Sarah Beckett, married to one Vincent Doolin," the sheriff read aloud. "Date, 6 months before any record of Mara. Signed by Reverend Elbert Hill." Mining camp chapel gasps and murmurs rippled through the gathered townsfolk. A woman in the crowd whispered, "That's Sarah. She's still up north, ain't she?" Gideon stepped forward, hands still steady. "Makes Mara's union invalid. Vince had no right to claim her. No legal hold. No moral one either." Vince jerked forward, face red, veins bulging. "She's mine." "No, Vince," Sheriff Cutter said, tightening the cuffs. "She never was." Josiah Yates cleared his throat. "Got something else." From inside his coat, he pulled the wrinkled petition. "This here's what Lomax passed around. Wanted to seize Gideon's ranch for public decency. I spoke with half these folks. Most signed under pressure. Lomax hinted at loans coming due early if they didn't. He unfolded it, held it up for all to see. Look close. Recognize your own names. Ask yourself why you put 'em down." A silence fell, long and deep. Faces shifted. Men looked away. A few stepped back from Lomax's side. Lomax, pale as chalk, tried to laugh it off. "Now wait just a—" Gideon cut him off. "You used fear to stir a mob. You aimed to ruin lives for profit." "I was protecting moral order," Lomax snapped. "No," Ruth said, stepping forward. "You were protecting your pocket." A woman in the crowd nodded slowly. "He cut my husband's payment grace short last fall. Said it was due to influence. Never made sense." Another man spoke up. "He threatened to pull my seed credit if I didn't." Support his complaint, the air turned colder, not from snow, but truth. Sheriff Cutter stepped toward Lomax now. "You deny any of this?" Lomax swallowed. "Can't prove it." Gideon raised an eyebrow. "We can. Multiple witnesses, signed statements, the petition, and the judge's reply." Cutter looked at the crowd, then at Lomax. "You're not under arrest, yet. But don't leave town." Lomax tried to scoff, but it came out thin and dry. Mara stepped forward for the first time, hands clenched at her sides. "I will not go back. Not to fear, not to silence, not to being something passed between men like cattle." Her voice trembled, but didn't break. Ruth stood beside her. You don't have to. Little Lark peeked out from behind her mother's skirt, then stepped into the circle of lantern light. She looked up at Gideon and whispered, "Are we safe now?" Gideon crouched, met her eyes. "You are." He glanced around at the gathering. Their posture shifted now, not just watching, but weighing. And most nodded. Vince was dragged toward town by 2 deputies. Lomax lingered, but the air had changed. His power cracked like a lake in thaw. As the crowd thinned, the wind eased. The snow, too, slowed to a hush. Mara looked to Gideon. "You didn't raise a gun. I didn't need to." Gideon says, "Hold up, banker. We ain't done." Phineas Lomax didn't speak as Gideon handed him the envelope. His hands trembled just a touch, not from cold, but from the knowledge that everything had shifted. Gideon's voice stayed calm. "My late wife, Eleanor, had this survey done years back. It shows a spring, high ridge, 2 miles east of town. Land's mine by record. Water's pure." Lomax blinked. "You mean to sell it?" "No," Gideon said. "I mean to share it." Murmurs rose behind him. Ruth, Josiah, the pastor, townsfolk who had once watched from porches now standing shoulder to shoulder in the snow-churned square. Gideon continued, "School can draw from it. So can the church. All I ask is that this town draft a rule, plain and fair. Any woman who says she fears harm gets shelter, not gossip. Gets process, not pitchforks." Cutter folded his arms. "That'd have to go through a vote." "Then vote," Gideon said. "But let it be a vote folks remember when their daughters come home with bruises." Lomax shifted, half turning, trying to vanish back into shadow. "Not yet," Gideon called. "You've got one more thing to sign." He held out a page, handwritten, plain and quiet. It read, "Public apology for coercion, threats, and misuse of influence. I acknowledge wrongdoing. I relinquish any debt claim made under duress." Lomax's mouth worked, but no words came. "If not," Gideon said, "we take this to court." And every man and woman here reads those affidavits out loud. Silence pressed the square like snowfall. Finally, with a stiff hand and a cracked pen, Lomax signed. The next morning, light broke clear on Dusty Hollow Ridge. Snow melted fast once it started. Josiah and Ruth helped dig the channel, shallow and curved, from the ridge spring to the Newtown trough. Gideon built the box frame himself, cedar joints clean and sanded. By the 3rd day, water flowed steady down to the green. Lark danced beside it in boots too big. Mara, sleeves rolled, helped Ruth measure a schoolhouse line with chalk and twine. Gideon fixed fence near the barn, one glove off, scratching at the frostbit rail with patient hands. Sheriff Cutter passed by once, hat tipped low. He said, "Funny thing about justice, when it's slow and quiet, folks trust it more." Gideon nodded. "That's how it ought to be." At Sunday supper, the pastor said grace and no one looked away from Mara. She sat straight, Lark curled against her side, clean, fed, full of laughter. Ruth poured coffee and said, "I've never seen a man stop a mob without firing a single shot." "He didn't stop a mob," Josiah said. "He reminded a town who they were." Late that night, Gideon found himself on the porch again, the air sharp but gentle. Mara joined him, with 2 mugs. "I still jump sometimes," she said, eyes on the tree line, "when a wagon wheel breaks. When boots scrape too hard. You've got a right to," he said. "But it's fading," she added softly, "the fear. Because you made space for something else." He took the mug. "Wasn't just me." "No," she agreed, "but you were the first." They stood there in the hush of thaw, lantern between them, steady flame. Inside, Lark slept with a quilt Ruth had sewn. Outside, snow melted to trickle, then rivulet, then creek. The town would remember this winter, not for its cold, but for how it warmed. If mercy backed by law feels like true grit to you, saddle up for the next ride, and share this story with someone who believes in second chances.